So welcome everybody to the second of our history evenings. We're very much looking forward to this after the success of the first one. There's been some great feedback on all of the presentation that happened so far, with some interesting facts that have come up over a variety of subjects. And now we're looking at the second instalment, which will take us from 1939 to the present day. So I'll now hand you over to our club historian and 2016 captain, Mr. Ian Jamson.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me for our second part of the history. The first part we covered from the foundation of the club in 1884 to the outbreak of the Second World War, and this talk this evening will go from the Second World War up until present day. So, for the second time in our history, the club offered the clubhouse to HM forces. The clubhouse was extensively used for billeting of officers from the King's Regiment under the command of the Adjutant Major Austin Cartmel. Although in 1939, courtesy of the club and the course was also extended to all serving officers of His Majesty's forces. Finances were much improved from the First World War, and the use of the facilities by the forces ensured a positive balance throughout the war. These were helped when the landlord temporarily reduced the rent from £300 to £150 per annum. A kitchen garden was established in the hollow behind the 5th green and down the side of the 3rd by Golf Cottage, and in 1940 alone, 3 tons of potatoes were grown. From 1939, the course was then extensively trenched and anti-invasion posts were erected. These were eventually removed in 1943. In 1940, some competitions were restarted. However, these must have been testing indeed, with obstacles such as the trenches and the posts aforementioned, and even cattle that were allowed to graze down the 3rd hole. They had to be all contended with. Throughout the spring and summer of 1940, Henry Cotton played exhibition matches in aid of the Red Cross, and his match at Formby raised the significant sum of £920, a considerable amount at the time. Another charity event that was also played in the same year was an exhibition snooker match between 2 of the best English professionals of their day, Stanley Newman and Sidney Smith. Early in 1941 came news that the Freshfield Golf Club, which was formerly the Banking and Insurance Golf Club, was due to be requisitioned to become an aerodrome. The Freshfield members had expected that they would be given back the clubhouse in 1942, but in actual fact, in August 41, the clubhouse was returned to them. The problem was there was just no course to play on. So, courtesy of our clubhouse, and indeed our course, was offered to Freshfield members. The Freshfield members brought with them supplies of tobacco, tea, sugar and alcohol, and they sold them to Formby at cost price, which were then sold on to our members and indeed the members of Freshfield at retail prices. Apart from that, they also brought cups, saucers, plates, crockery, etc. The picture on the right, as you can see, are just a couple of spoons that were won by the medal winners at both the Banking and Insurance Golf Club and Freshfield Golf Club. And the picture is the Freshfield Clubhouse. It was during the war that the relatively closed shop of the same members serving on council changed, and voting for council members started as we do today. During the war years, inevitably membership declined, and the club had only some 300 members. A new category was therefore instigated to try and boost members, and this was called the temporary wartime member. This category was disbanded straight after the war in 1945. One amusing minute I came across when I was doing some research for this talk was in 1943, when the House Committee reported that stocks of whiskey, port and brandy were good. However, the club were running short of gin. Council immediately sanctioned the approval of the purchase of a puncheon of gin. A puncheon, everybody, is 170 gallons or 318 litres. So I suspect we were probably okay for gin for a little while. One other notable minute also occurred in 1943 when council were made aware that one of our members, a Mr. G. Rimmer, had been taken prisoner of war. At the meeting, they reported that they were going to reach out to him via the Red Cross. The minute for the following month reported that indeed Mr. Rimmer had been sent a Red Cross parcel, some 1,000 Woodbine cigarettes. Also, council agreed in that meeting that the club would send Mr. Rimmer 200 cigarettes a week while he was incarcerated. The photographs I'm showing now show a picture taken from the Luftwaffe in 1942 of what was to become the Woodvale Airdrome. And this picture was actually, or is hanging in our club room, presented to the captain of the time, David Hughes, from Neil and Simonson. The one on the right, however, was taken by the RAF in 1945 and indeed shows much more of the golf course. So as we get to the end of the war, we'd still actually have very much a lasting memory of war on the golf course. The hollow on the right of the 15th hole at the start of the fairway was created by an incendiary bomb. And this fact was verified by the adjutant, as we mentioned previously, Austin Cartmel. As the war ended, the club was conscious to make a growth in the number of members to pay for the ravages of the war. In late 1944, the secretary resigned, and to give you some idea as to how potentially popular this position was, some 184 applicants applied for the post. At the same time, there was a shortage of houses. So in 1945, council proposed to purchase the secretary house up to the value of £2,500. This proposal was defeated by a large margin at a special general meeting. However, sometime later, a flat in Freshfield Road was subsequently purchased for the secretary. With most members now returned from wartime duties and back in employment, in 1946, the subscriptions were increased by 2 guineas to 10 guineas, the first increase for some 20 years. A new lease was also signed in 1946. Lease on the course was for 50 years and the clubhouse on a new 999-year lease. It was also decided that the club would endeavour to purchase the links if this ever became a possibility. At the time, the club were also becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the greenkeeper. So in 1949, a new greenkeeper, Mr. H.L. Partridge, was employed from Royal Liverpool. His start was not too auspicious, however. Soon after he moved into Golf Cottage, he met with a very unfortunate accident when a detonator in the cottage exploded and blew off 2 of his fingers. In the same year, however, we did hold the English Close Championship in the April of that year. And despite his injuries, Partridge and his team received very high praise for the condition of the golf course. Regrettably, later in 1949, the president, Lord Derby, died and was succeeded as president by his grandson. The club really started modernising and moving forward by the late 40s. John Moores, later Sir John, joined his brother Cecil on council. What is not known to many of the club at the time was that John Moores paid the salaries of the administrative staff, and indeed he paid half of the secretary's salary throughout the war and after. This has actually been verified by Sir John's colleague and co-worker at Littlewoods, Harry Thomas, who was our 2000-year captain. The central heating system had also been replaced, and this was paid for by Cecil Moores. And then finally, the main sewerage was connected via Mr. A.J. Taylor's house, Beamerside, in Victoria Road. During and after the war, the tradition of ordering a Formby or a Freshfield began to really take shape and became popular. The Formby was a whiskey and soda, and the Freshfield a pink gin. In 1949 also, the Formby Hare was instigated, and this has grown in prestige ever since and is now a world-ranking amateur tournament. In 1950, the captain, W. Stoddard, was the first generation of the younger captains and set about to modernise the club. The clubhouse itself was by now some 50 years old and did indeed require some significant modernisation. Estimates came in at around £4,500, of which over £1,000 of this had been donated by members. 1950 was also the year that Frank Pennick wrote a very popular handbook about the golf club. We also hosted the Brabazon Trophy in 1951, which was won by Ronnie White. Ronnie was a Liverpool lawyer, was seen as probably the finest amateur of his day. He was an old Crosbayan and a member of Royal Birkdale Golf Club. Ronnie was a 5-time Walker Cup player and is serial winner at Formby, winning major events on no fewer than 4 occasions at Formby. In 1950, the renowned golf writer Guy Farrer wrote an article, Formby's Green and Silent Valleys. The article, as you can see, I've produced here. The club hosted the Daily Telegraph Amateur Professional Foursomes in 1950. This event was watched by large galleries. The tournament itself ran for 5 years between 1947 and 1951 at venues such as Birkdale, Lytham and Ganton. The format was that 32 leading professionals played with 32 leading amateurs. 5 rounds of knockout golf were played, and eventually Wally Smithers and the 3-time Walker Cup player Jimmy Bruin emerged victorious. I think now is the time I should talk about Gerald Thorpe, Formby's greatest benefactor. Included in the modernisation of the clubhouse was a downstairs bar. Until this time, members had been served by stewards in their seats. The cost of the bar, the refurbishment of the area, and indeed all the furniture was paid for by Gerald Thorpe. Gerald also set up the Younger Golfers Fund in 1952, with an initial donation of £500, which he topped up on very many occasions. The fund was to defray the costs of membership for junior and younger members. To give you an idea of the success of this initiative, in 1951, there were only 6 junior members in the club. By 1961, there were 137 members under 30. All of these members benefited greatly from Gerald's generosity. Gerald died in 1966 at the age of 85 and then bequeathed his considerable fortune to the golf club. By 1952, Golf Cottage was close to derelict. So after unsuccessfully trying to buy the freehold, the cottage was forfeited back to the Blundell estate. Instead, the club purchased Wendholme in Flaxfield Road in Formby for £1,400 as a house for the head greenkeeper. In the same year, the tie, which had been first introduced in 1950, had really started to become widely worn. The tie then was, as it is today, dark green with silver fir trees. Also in the 1950s, in fact in 1953, the club was gifted our first TV set, which was donated by 2 members. In 1954, the shortened course, or the red course, was introduced for the first time, and in that same year, a touring Australian amateur golf team were entertained to golf and dinner at the club. The following year, we got a new flag, which was also donated by one of our members, and that has been adopted ever since. By 1957, some £15,200 had been spent on clubhouse improvements. In that time, the club had received £11,500 in donations and gifts from the membership. Quite a magnificent and significant sum, particularly when you bear in mind that the annual subscription at the time was only some £15. I've produced here a photograph which shows a cartoon of some of our members in 1952. Formby hosted our first amateur championship in 1957. This actually came about somewhat by luck. The championship was due to be held at Royal St George's, but due to the Suez Crisis in 1956, petrol was short, so the RNA decided to hold the championship on a course with a railway close at hand. This obviously fell straight into our lap. 6 Formby members competed, and indeed so did our future secretary manager, Alan Thirlwell. 2 Formby members, Blackshaw and Fawcett, reached the 4th round before Blackshaw lost to the eventual winner, Reed Jack. I've now produced and shown you here just some images from the 57 championship, with the winner, Reed Jack, holding aloft the trophy. In 1960, club members made a collection of £66 to enable the assistant pro, Tomlinson, to enter the Centenary Open. Regrettably, this wasn't too successful because unfortunately he missed the cut. In 1961, Michael Rees won the Lancashire County Championship at the club. Indeed, this one was the first of 3 county championships that Mike would win. He won 2 at Formby and the 3rd at Royal Lytham and St Anne's. Also around this time, our senior past captain, Peter Wilson, was making a name for himself in golfing circles. Peter has possibly the most unique of experiences, having represented both Lancashire and Yorkshire in county matches. 1961 was also the year that we saw trees being planted along the right-hand side of the 1st and 2nd holes. The Sphere magazine featured Formby in their Britain's Greatest Golf Clubs format feature in their pages in the same year, and this I've produced, and you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. The Formby Pro-Ams. In the 1960s, Lord Derby, who was both president of Formby and indeed the Professional Golfers Association, sponsored a series of Pro-Ams at the club. The first year of this came to £1,500 and was underwritten by Lord Derby and by Cecil Moores. He would also underwrite subsequent years with his brother John Moores and Lord Derby. This tournament proved very popular with the professionals at the time, with the leading 20 professional golfers invited. In 1961, the first year of playing, a youthful 18-year-old Simon Marsh won with his professional partner Sid Scott. Simon shot a net 64-65 to enable his partner to pocket the first prize of £150. The following year, the honours went to David Appleton with scores of 64 and 63 net to help Ken Bousfield take the honours. During the Pro-Ams, one of our members, Mr. Senior Smith, offered £100 for a hole-in-one. Somewhat to his surprise, a hole-in-one was achieved by Henry Cotton, playing with Sands Johnson in 1963 on the 5th hole. This hole-in-one was indeed Henry Cotton's very first hole-in-one in competitive golf. By 1965, the costs were becoming prohibitive and the tournament was played no longer. The next couple of pages, I've got some photographs from press cuttings of the day. You can see Neil Cole's 65 as the new record. Lord Derby, and then the bottom right picture, a very youthful Michael Rees. This one, the powerful 19-year-old David Appleton wins with partner Ken Bousfield. The trophy on the right-hand side was actually an interesting one. This trophy was commissioned by Henry Cotton's wife to commemorate his hole-in-one, and was part of his estate that was purchased at auction by our club member, Matthew Banbury. Matthew has very kindly donated this trophy to the club on an indefinite loan. This is the photograph of the scoreboard, final scoreboard in 1964. And on this, you can see some famous professional names, but also lots of familiar Formby Golf Club members' names. After unsuccessfully trying to purchase the links on at least 2 occasions in our history, possibly the most important part of our history of the club occurred quite out of the blue in 1962, when the club received a letter from the landlord, Blundell Estate, offering to sell the freehold of the entire site, some 390 to 400 acres. After negotiations, a price for the purchase was agreed of £24,500. An appeal for funds was commenced immediately, and by January 1963, loans totaling to just under 26,000 were announced, as well as just over £500 in donations. These loans were repaid not long after from the legacy Gerald Thorpe left in 1966. Yes, Gerald again. This photograph was taken in the early 1960s, and you can see clearly the layout of the old golf course. The World Senior Championship, sponsored by Teachers Whiskey, was held at Formby in 1965. The match was the final between the winner of the US PGA Seniors Tournament and the British PGA Seniors Champion. It was a 36-hole match play event contended by Sam Snead and Charlie Ward. Snead eventually emerged victorious on the 36th green after getting up and down from the bunker on the right at 18. And you can see great photograph of Snead playing that shot out of the bunker with the crowds behind. The final was refereed by our very own Peter Wilson. The 1967 Amateur Championship saw the club host the tournament for the second time in our history. As in 1957, 6 Formby members competed. Unfortunately, Peter Wilson and Mike Rees both lost in the first round. Round 3 saw the end of the Formby Challenge, with Blackshaw and Snodgrass both going out. Notable names that did compete in that tournament were Joe Carr, the famous Irish golfer, probably one of the best amateurs of all time, Michael Benalik, another famous English name, and Dr. David Marsh, who would become an honorary member of Formby Golf Club. 3 of the 4 finalists were American, with Bob Dixon eventually emerging victorious with a 2-1 victory. The cover story of Golf Illustrated in June of that year shows a picture of Bob Dixon playing from the bunker on the old 9th hole. Here are some of the images from the 67, including Benalik and Carr, and indeed Bob Dixon, and the article in Golf Illustrated showing the different swings between Bob Dixon and Ron Carudo. Into the late 60s, our head greenkeeper, Partridge, retired after 19 years in service. Partridge was indeed only the third head greenkeeper to be employed in that role since 1903. That year also, the club bought a flat for the secretary in Freshfield Road. Sorry, the flat that had been bought for the secretary was sold, and the following year, the club sold the house in Flaxfield Road. The anonymous member that had been paying half of the secretary's salary since the war suggested that the club was now financially in a position to pay the salary in full. And as I mentioned previously, this anonymous member was revealed as Sir John Moores. In 1969, Formby hosted the inaugural playing of the Seniors Amateur Championship, and this was won by R. Pattison with a 36-hole score of 152. So as we move into the 70s, early in 1971, Council decided that there should be an official history written of the club for our centenary in 1984, some 13 years off. The English International, the well-known journalist and our longest-serving member, having joined in 1918, Ivor Thomas, was asked to take on the task. He reported back less than 12 months later that he had completed this book. Somewhat surprised, Council nevertheless did produce our official history of our first 100 years, just some 12 years early. In 1972 also, Council allowed Peter Marsh, Simon's father, to become the very first member to use a personalised trolley car on the links. I came across this increase in catering and bar prices when I was doing the research for this, which I thought was terrific. It doesn't half show how inflation has taken its toll over the last 50 years. What about 14p for a pint? Cognac at 20p, or even a Remy at 25p. Bottle of Yugoslav Riesling for £1? Not sure. Tastes are slightly more refined. What about a bottle of Grand Cru Burgundy for 170? And if you're feeling really extravagant, what about a bottle of Bollinger for £3.40? It was in 1970 that the impact on the course from coastal erosion was first recognised as a serious problem. The effects of erosion led to an erosion committee being established in 1974, and they instructed Frank Pennick as the course architect. Pennick made his first visit to the club in May of 74 to assess the land being used for the new holes. He designed these holes, but apparently was not too best pleased with the land that he had been offered. The cost of these new holes, including the remodelling of the 10th, came to approximately £25,000. And this cost was paid out of funds from, you've guessed it, the Gerald Thorpe Trust. Work completed in 1976. Unfortunately, Pennick died in 83 before the holes had been played. So his understudy, Donald Steele, continued with the implementation of these holes and fine-tuned them to the fine holes we have now. I've now got a series of old pictures I can show you, giving you an idea of some of the old holes. So this was, as you can see, the old 7th. And our fabulous old 9th hole, short par 3 across the coastline, I should say. The 10th was a par 5, which is now our par 3. And the 11th, taken in about 1978, before the dunes had been built at the back of the 11th green. The 12th hole, which is very recognisable. And again, the 16th, taken around the same time in 78. Several people have said, why did we need to get rid of the old holes and build new ones? This map, Google Maps, superimposed with the old holes on it, gives a very clear indication of where they would have been and are now on Formby Beach. Now, it would be remiss of me not to mention Jack Barlow when talking about the history of the golf club. In 1974, one of the most prominent names in our history, Jack Barlow, was elected a life member. Jack had been at the club since the age of 14 in 1909, first employed as a page boy on 2 shillings and 6pence a week. His hours were 14 hours a day for the first week and 12 hours a day, the following week. Jack became steward of the club during the Second World War, having served in the First World War. He served the club for some 65 years in total, retiring from full-time employment in 61, but continued in a part-time capacity, helping out for a further 13 years. Jack's memory was legendary. Remembered names of members and guests alike, even those that had not visited for very many years. Our senior past captain tells me that it was through Jack's good offices that he became a member here. Jack almost proposed him, seconded him, and put him through onto committee. So we owe Jack a great debt of gratitude. One of the most talked about alternative stories of any Open is of the numerous attempts made by the infamous Maurice Flitcroft to try and enter under his own and many assumed names. The story starts, however, in Formby. The 46-year-old unemployed crane driver was living on social security when he decided to enter the Open. He borrowed the £50 entry fee from his wife, Jean. When the entry form requested information on his handicap, he decided to skip that part as he'd never actually played 18 holes and signed as an unattached professional. On the first tee of the qualifying round at Formby, Flitcroft aroused some suspicion from his playing partner, Jim Howard, who reported, after gripping the club like he was intent on murdering someone, Flitcroft hoisted it straight up, came down vertically, and the ball travelled precisely 4 feet. Flitcroft eventually recorded a score of 121. However, even this can't be accurately recorded because on the 7th he took a 12, but there was a question mark how many times he hit the ball in the trees. 121 is the highest ever recorded score in Open history. Throughout the latter part of the 1970s, apart from Open qualifying, several championships were played over our links, including the 76 Lancashire Championships, won by Mike Rees, as mentioned earlier. The Lancashire Ladies Championship were held in 77, and in 1978, we hosted the Senior Amateur for the second time in our history, won at this time by the aforementioned Ronnie White. The decade concluded with the club hosting the English County Championships. One other notable event did occur at this time. On the 1st of September 1977, the 2-time English champion golfer Alan Thirlwell took up his position as club secretary-manager. Into the 80s, the club continued to host prestigious events, including the Boys Amateur Championship in 1918, the England Boys versus Scotland Boys, and the Jack Leglise Trophy, GB&I versus Continental Europe in the same year. 1980 also saw the English Ladies County Finals and the varsity match. The club have always had a strong connection to the Oxford and Cambridge Golfing Society, dating back to 1899. The varsity match has been hosted at Formby no fewer than 7 times, more than any other club except in 4. Formby was actually chosen as the venue in 1956 by the then Cambridge captain, David Marsh. David went on to become a 2-time English amateur champion, Walker Cup captain, captain of the RNA, and became an honorary member of Formby in 1982. So what about Formby and Royal status? I've been asked a few times about this. So dating back as early as 1910, the local MP, Sir Edward Marshall Hall, wrote to council asking if they would like him to investigate the possibility of acquiring royal status. This at the time never really got much traction, and we never took up this opportunity. The possibility was again mooted in the 1930s after Lord Derby had played the course with the then Prince of Wales, later Edward VIII. The story reported at the time is this was also declined by Lord Derby. And finally, in the captain's recollections page, the 1981 captain, John Roberts, wrote, "We were sounded out once again to put our name forward for royal status." And again, Lord Derby and Council decided that this was not necessary, as we had turned it down previously. So into our centenary. 1984 was the club's centenary. Lord Derby was elected captain, and the centenary was celebrated with a well-attended gala dinner. And the year ended with a centenary concert given by members and friends for members and family. James Taylor wrote a short and updated history of the club as an addendum and addition to Ivor Thomas's 1972 history. The new holes were officially played on for this first time as a precursor to the Amateur Championship, where large crowds turned out to watch the championship, the 3rd time it had been played at Formby. The actual championship of 1984 produced an incredible final featuring Jose Maria Olazabal and Colin Montgomery. Both players would become Ryder Cup captains of the future and 2 of Europe's greatest ever golfers. Apart from the Amateur Championship, the BBC also filmed an episode of their popular TV programme Around with Alice, featuring Lord Derby and the comedian Jasper Carrott. A youthful James Harrocks, our 125th anniversary captain, caddied for Peter Alliss. Alliss had a great affinity for Formby, and in May 2020, only some 2 months before his death, in an interview with the Daily Mail, he named Formby as one of his 5 best golf courses. In '85, another important purchase was made by the club. We managed to acquire the land between the first tee and the railway, enabling the overflow car park area and a short game practice area to be built. Throughout the latter part of the 80s, the club continued to host major events, including in 1985, the Ladies British Open Amateur Championship. The home internationals were also played in '85, and in '88, the boys' home internationals, which featured Padraig Harrington playing for Ireland. The Lancashire Championships were once again played here in '89. 1990 was a year that the course layout was amended to be what we recognise as the course we play on now, other than the 14th. The position of the 9th tee was changed and the routing of the hole adjusted accordingly. The English Amateur Championships were held here in 1991, with Ronnie Wilson prevailing, and in 1993, Alan Thirlwell retired as secretary manager and became an honorary member of the club. 1994 was the year that our current president assumed this role upon the death of the 18th Earl. And in the same year, we hosted our 3rd Senior Amateur Championship. In 1996, the club hosted the final qualifying for the Open. This was played at Royal Lytham Stands that year, in which Tom Lehman went on to lift the claret jug. Tom Lehman, however, did spend a significant part of his preparation playing at Formby the week previous to the Open. DJ Russell and Patrick Showland both played in the final qualifying and broke the previous course record when they both recorded a score of 68. Also that year, Sands Johnson was elected president of the Lancashire Union of Golf Clubs, the 9th Formby member to receive such an accolade, with names such as the Earl of Derby, W.H.L. Lister, Frank Fawcett, Peter Wilson, and Ian Campion being in that role also. The most momentous event of the 90s, however, for the club began in 96 when a clubhouse development committee was established under the chairmanship of Paul Corkill. In 1997, with Stuart Povell as captain, a special general meeting was called to consider converting the locker room to a bar and creating a new locker room, and to extend the existing dining room on the first floor. Both suggestions were accepted by the membership. The work was expected to cost just around £750,000. Harry Thomas was appointed club supervisor and Richard O'Marney club architect. This work was finished the following year in 1998. To pay for the extension, all members would pay an extra £150 on their subscriptions for the following 10 years. Here's a photograph of the clubhouse with the new extension. We all know and recognise as the clubhouse now. In the latter part of the 1990s, the club hosted the Inter-Services Championships and also the Ladies International European Amateur. We hosted the Brabazon again in 98, where the winner, the Swede Peter Hansson, broke the course record with a 71. And in 1989, we hosted the Junior Open. The Italian representative was the future Open winner and Ryder Cup star, Francesco Molinari. Here's a photograph of the 8th hole in 1995, which again you will recognise, but you will also notice the trees that have been removed down the left and the right-hand side. So moving into the 21st century, the blue tees were used from 2000 onwards. Club member Nick Doherty was selected to represent England in 2000, and the following year he was part of the successful Great Britain and Ireland winning Walker Cup team when they beat the USA at Sea Island in Georgia. 2001 was also the year that the lift was installed in the clubhouse, organised by Harry Thomas with funds secured from the Moores Trust. In 2002, to the relief of most members and indeed most visitors, Captain Simon Marsh arranged for the sycamore tree on the hill on the 15th hole to be removed. In 2004 saw us host the Curtis Cup. Probably the largest crowds that had been at Formby to watch any event came to watch the Curtis Cup and see the USA prevail 10-8. The USA team featured the 14-year-old star Michelle Wie and future US Tour star Paula Creamer. For many years, it had been suggested that the new practice ground was needed and it had to be extended. Finally, in 2005, plans to create a new practice ground came to fruition. This required redesign in the 14th, the last significant change we have seen on our course to date. The new hole was played when we hosted the final qualifying for the 2006 Open, during which Jim Payne set the current professional record of 67. Here is the new 14th, being played in 2017 by the 1989 European Open winner, Andrew Murray. In 2006, the weather that summer was hot and sunny, which led to a large fire that burned for over a week down the 8th and 9th holes. Although this could have been a catastrophe, in fact, the opposite was true. The following year, when the 9th hole had had a time to regenerate, the definition, which had been somewhat patchy previously, was very much more pronounced. Undoubtedly, the 9th is now our most photographed hole and has possibly now become our, inverted commas, signature golf hole. The most notable event of our 125th year was the hosting of the Amateur Championship for the 4th time. The championship was won by Matteo Manacero, who beat Sam Hutsby in the final. Tommy Fleetwood, who had won the Lancashire County Championships at Formby 2 years previously, unfortunately had lost in the quarter-final. The anniversary was celebrated with a well-attended gala dinner. The photograph shows James Harrocks with Lord Derby accepting a gift from the captain of the R&A for our 125th birthday. Here are some of the images of the 2009 Amateur Championship. The new decade saw Formby win the England Club Championship in both 2010 and 2011. The team also won the Lancashire Club Championships for 3 successive years. The Formby team at that time included future tour professionals Paul Kinnear and James Wilson. In fact, Paul Kinnear had qualified for the Open the year previously and in actual fact led the field for part of the first day. In 2012, under the watchful eye of Captain Neil Roy, extensive refurbishment of the clubhouse was taken out. This included the rebuilding of all the kitchens and first floor area, the bar areas, the dining room, the club room, and the members' bar area downstairs, which were also redecorated, refurbished, new air conditioning, and new furniture. Now, it would be remiss of me not to mention snooker when talking about the history of Formby Golf Club, because billiards and snooker have always played an important part in the life of Formby. The 2 snooker tables indeed were gifts from the Derby family when the clubhouse was built in 1901 and came from Knowsley Hall. Apart from being a social event, early days billiards added to the finances of the club, with players paying for the right to use the lights. As early as 1902, in the suggestions book, it included reference to the billiard tables with a suggestion that the pockets be widened to speed up play, a sentiment I can certainly get on board with even today. The snooker trophies, the King's Trophy, gifted as a token of the friendship of the King's Regiment, and the Harold Withers Cup, both date back to the early 40s, and here they are shown on the right-hand side. In 2015, Formby member and 1991 World Snooker Champion John Parrott invited his friend, the 6-time World Snooker Champion Steve Davis, to play a charity exhibition match. Over the subsequent years, John would go on to invite further world champions, Dennis Taylor and Ken Doherty, to play exhibition matches for Woodlands Hospice. "2016 was a busy year for the club. During that year, we hosted 3 events. First was the England versus France international match. The victorious English team featured our very own Paul Kinnear. And as I mentioned previously, Paul had led the Open for some part of the previous year. The Senior Amateur Championship were played later in the year. The 10's final day saw Chip Lutz win the championship for the third time. Chip would go on and then become an honorary member of Formby Golf Club and has returned to play on at least a couple of occasions. The biggest event of the year, however, was the Arnold Palmer Cup, to a large extent secured for Formby by the efforts of Paul Duffy. Europe defeated the USA team 18.5, 11.5. Both teams featured players that have gone on to win on both European and US golf tours. Here are some of the images from the Arnold Palmer Cup. In 2018, Formby hosted the English Amateur Championship for the 6th time in our history. We also hosted the England versus Spain international match in 2019. A good luck message was sent to both teams from Justin Rose and Jose Maria Olazabal, and this was played to the teams the evening before the contest. The weather the following day, regrettably, was appalling, and the first day was completely washed out and suspended. Eventually, the English team would go on to prevail when the match restarted. In the last year of the decade also, the course architect, Martin Ebert, produced a comprehensive report. His brief was to continue to enhance the course. Some of this work was completed in 2020, including the removal of the hill on the 4th to give much more visibility of the bunkers on the right-hand side and the green, and the remodeling of the approach to the 11th to make it a much more natural approach. Part of his report was also to future-proof the course from further erosion. In 2019, our club member and our scratch team captain, Jeff Harris, won the British Mid-Amateur Championship, the Logan Trophy, at the Leicestershire Golf Club. And in the same year, Rodney Wilson was elected captain some 50 years after his father, the senior past captain Peter, was in this role. This is a photograph of our clubhouse and members in our 135th year. This is and in 2020, for the first time in our history, government restrictions due to the COVID pandemic led to the clubhouse and then the course being closed for long periods in the year. In the summer, however, after the lockdown, the course was in absolutely incredible condition. The greens were running at almost 12 on the stimp meter in September for the club championship. In December, all golf courses in England were locked down once again. So everybody, we look forward to a brighter 2020 and possibly another 135 years. And I will leave you with just some images of the course, the end of 2020. Thank you, everybody.
Well, Ian, I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody in offering a most sincere thanks for that. Fantastic insight into some of the more well-known stories and also a number of the lesser-known stories. So two great sessions there. And as I say, on behalf of all of our members, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.